ॐ भूर्भुवः स्वः तत्सवितुर्वरेण्यं भर्गो देवस्य धीमहि धियो यो नः प्रचोदयात्। ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः. Namaste my dear friends. This is video number 7 on Viveka Chudamani of Adi Sankaracharya. In this video, I am going to describe the process of formation of our gross body. I start with video verse number 74. I have included the same verse in 6th video, but the process of formation of gross body starts with this verse number 74. So this video I start with verse number 74. The five great elements are described as first created in their subtle form, and then through a process of combinations among themselves they become the gross elements which we are able to perceive with our sense organs. The process by which the subtle elements become the perceivable gross elements is described in the next verse. Prasparans sarmilatani bhutva sathulani च स्थूल शरीर हेतुव मात्रास्तदीया विषया भवन्तु शब्दादः पंच सुखाय भोगतु. Having united with parts of one another, they become gross and become the cause for the formation of the gross body. Their subtle essence constitutes the sense objects, five in number, such as sound, etc., which contribute to the enjoyment of the experiencer, the individual ego. A mention has already been made of the subtle elements, and now we are told how they, by a process of mutual combination, condense to a grossness sufficient to become perceptible to the sense organs. The process by which the subtle elements become the five gross elements, which are accepted even by modern scientists as the unit of matter in the world, is called in Sanskrit Panchikaranam, a pentamerous self-duplication and mutual combination. This process is explained in Vedanta as taking place in four distinct stages of self-division and mutual combination. The rudimentary subtle elements are constituted of units called tanmatras. There are five distinct tanmatras, each for the five great elements: ether, air, fire, water, and earth. Each tanmatra, unit of each of the five elements, in the first stage of its grossification, shows a tendency to divide itself into two halves. In the second stage, each tanmatra of the five elements bifurcates and separates into two equal parts. Panchikarna, the process of pentamerous self-division and mutual combination. Stage: ether 1, air 2, fire 3, water 4, earth 5. Description: tanmatras, each in itself. Second stage: these tanmatras are divided into two equal parts of each. So description: tendency to divide into two equal parts. Third stage, the split is complete. Fourth state, one half remaining intact, the other splits into four. Fifth state, each half married to four bits borrowed from all others. In the third stage, one half of all the five elements remains intact, while the other half of each element gets divided into four equal parts. Thus, under the column ether, we have in its third stage half a tanmatra remaining intact, the dark half, and the other half divided into four equal parts, each constituting therefore 1/8 of the original tal matra. In the fourth stage of its development, each half tanmatra combines with 1/8 tanmatra of all the other elements, constituting one unit of the gross element. Thus, in the accompanying chart, one half of ether joins with 4/1/8 bits borrowed from the other four elements, that is 1/2 ether plus 1/8 of air plus 1/8 of fire plus 1/8 of water plus 1/8 ether, which then constitute one unit of gross akasa ether. Similarly, half of air plus 1/8 bits borrowed from ether, fire, water and earth becomes one unit of gross air. Thus is the combination in each of the five elements. This process is called Panchikarna, the pentamorous self-division and combination process. Out of the gross elements, the physical body is formed, but the sense objects of sound, touch, form, taste, and smell are constituted of nothing other than the subtle tanmatras of the rudimentary elements. The gross elements provide the instrument for the enjoyment of the subtle elements. All these arrangements are made so that the ego center may experience a life of happiness or misery as directed by the storehouse of his vasanas. The enjoyer or sufferer ego is the self conditioned by the mind and the intellect. This conditioning can never bring about any real bondage to the self, just as any harm done to my reflection in the mirror can never harm me. Stanza number 75. य एषु मूढ़ा विषयेषु बद्धा रागो रूपाशेन सुदुर्धर्मेण आयान्ति निर्यान्त्यद्य ऊर्ध्व मुच्चै सवकरम दूतेन जवेन्नीतः. Those thoughtless ones who are bound to these sense objects by the stout ropes of attachment, so very difficult to cut, as under come and go, up and down, carried by the compelling force of the enjoy of the reactions of their own past actions. We know that the sense objects are innocent tanmatras, which in another form become the sense organs and the gross body. Steam cannot bind water, both being but the same element in its subtle or gross form. A sansarin is under the persecution of sense objects because of his attachment to them. These attachments are so strong that they become almost unbreakable. Thus, bound to the gross, the ego acts out its experiences and yearns for more. Every moment it perpetrates endless activities, each providing its own reactions to be enjoyed or suffered by the same ego. Thus, repeatedly, the same ego visits different fields of activities and in a variety of environments. It again and again enters and leaves the arena of existence, reaping its reactions and sowing new seeds through desire prompted activities, which in their turn compel it to come again to reap the fruits of the new harvest. In the last line of this verse are two innocent looking phrases which in an aphoristic form gives us the theory of karma as understood by the Vedantin. According to the Mimamsa, according to the Mimamsakas, God is the Almighty Power, omniscient and omnipotent, just and true, who distribute the fruits of actions according to the purity of motives, clarity of conscience, sincerity of application, faithfulness, and obedience to the eternal prescriptions laid down in the immortal Vedas. But according to Vedanta, much more intellectually satisfying is the theory that the reaction of an action is not anything different from the action itself. An action performed in a particular time and place may fulfill itself perhaps in another place and in a future period of time. A bud fulfills itself in its fruit, and there is no need for a supreme power's intervention for the petals to fall off and the fruit to mature. The life history of a thought expressed action is the immediate action which is finally concluded only in its reaction. Action and reaction are equal and opposite. One of Newton's laws is perhaps true even in philosophy. So, actions undertaken and performed at the instant of its instance of its delusory attachment with the sense objects guide each ego center to its self dictated destinies of enjoyment or sorrow. Thought by thought, wading through actions, the ego orders for itself a future world wherein it can enjoy its demand, be it the life of a pig or the life of a godman. This is the burden of the term carried up and down the ladder of evolution and devolution through right activity and discrimination. When we develop detachment, the sense objects cannot bind us and our activities become oriented to and ignorance through discovery and knowledge of the eternal and true principle of divinity in us. In Vedanta Shastra, the possible worms for taking birth from fall under two distinct groups, the higher and the lower. In the higher yonis, we are born only to enjoy the ethereal sense objects which can provide through the necessary instruments of perception and enjoyment a greater share of finite joys for a longer period of existence. This is called the experience of heaven. The other type is called the lower yonis, which comprise existence in the form of animals and birds, plants and trees. These lower forms introduce us to a plane of consciousness wherein the individual egos with their different degrees of dullness come to experience an immense amount of concentrated sorrow. These two groups exhaust all possible future births and are indicated by the term carried up and down. When the reactions of the past actions neither tend towards too much enjoyment nor too much suffering, that is, they are almost equally equibalanced, then such an ego center with its slightly predominant tendencies to be either good or bad presents itself in a human form. Every man in his lifetime has occasions to smile and to sob, to enjoy success and to suffer failures, but he is also provided with a discriminative intellect with which he can distinguish between the real and the unreal. In this world, neither are we dead drunk with happiness nor fully drowned in sorrow. Thus, a chance is given to everyone to consciously move either up or down or towards the infinite freedom of pure godhood. Spiritual endeavor, however, is possible neither in the heavenly planes of experiences indicated by the term up nor in the fields of sorrows covered by the term down. Each of us comes to gain the required field appropriate and forming a perfectly logical sequence with the motives, thoughts, and desires entertained in the past, guided by the very instincts created in us as a result of our past karmas, that is, ordered by our own karma duta. We reach our destinations sought by ourselves. They are nothing but frozen past intentions now beginning to thaw. Stanza number 76. Sabdadibhi panchbhirev pancha panchamavapuh savgunen badhya kurang matang patang meen bhranga narah panchbhirchit kim. The deer, the elephant, the moth, the fish, and the honeybee, these five are annihilated because of their slavery to one or the other of the senses, such as sound, etc., through their own attachment. What then is the condition of a man who is attached to all these five? We are now discussing how attachment to the senses bind, enslave, and destroy the peace of mind and freedom of true living. At this moment, Sankara is very appropriately reminded of the various examples provided by nature where certain species meet their death due to extreme attachment to one or the other of the five senses. These examples clearly show that Sankara was not living in the state of a Ganges stone samadhi. He was very much alive to the world of beauties and thrills, the world of incidents and happenings around him. The deer is always fascinated by melodious sound, and the deer hunter sings to charm the deer. Attracted by the melody of sound, the deer has no awareness of the danger it is in and turns in the direction of the music. The hunter soon makes it his target. The elephants, especially in the mating season, become extremely attached to the sense of touch, rubbing against each other and walking without caution. They fall into the pits got ready to catch them. The moth is enchanted by form and attracted by the brilliance of the flame. It flutters towards it with an agonizing impatience and gets burnt. The fish, ravenously hungry at all times, in its gluttony, swallows the bait, is caught, and thus meat its end in the stomach of fish eaters. The poor honey bee, attracted by the fragrant smell of flowers, pursues its industrious vocation, collects honey from the flowers, and hoards it in its hive until at last heartless man sets fire to the hive in order to loot the honey wealth of the bee. The San- Thus, Sankara gives us five typical examples wherein each has met its doom because of its attachment to one or the other of the five senses. Most dramatic it becomes when Sankara concludes with the exclamation, "What then is in store for man who is attached to all these five?" When a man of ignorance, having neither discrimination nor detachment, vulgarly runs after sense objects for his temporary nerve ticklings, he becomes a sad victim of his delusion and meets a calamitous end, for he has allowed himself to be bound by the five strong ropes. Stanza number 77. Dosein तीव्रो विषय कृष्ण स्रप विषादपि विषम निहन्ति भोक्तारम दृष्टारम चक्षु चक्षुषापयम. Sense objects are even more venomous in their tragic effects than cobra poison. Poison is fatal to one who swallows it, but the sense objects kill him who even looks at them with his eyes. At this juncture, Sankara discusses how dangerous it is for a seeker to be attached to the enjoyment of sense objects. He has already told us how tragic is the end of those living beings who have but a single sense appetite. In order to emphasize the virulence of sense poison, Sankara gives yet another verse which is very famous inasmuch as we often hear it being quoted from all pulpits. Explaining the dangerous intensity of this poison, the Acharya compares it with the venom of cobra. If there is some distance between a cobra and an individual, the poison in the cobra cannot affect him. Nobody is known to have died of poison because he merely saw a cobra in a zoo. The venom can be fatal to a person only when he is bitten by a cobra. Compared with this, sense objects are more virulent because they can annihilate the individual who just looks at them. The organ of vision, Chaksusa api, mentioned in the verse, represents all the other four sense objects and indicates a similar end when all other sense organs, individually or collectively, run after their sense objects, bringing about a total annihilation. Stanza number 78. विषया सह महापाशाद्यो विमुक्तः सुदुस्ते जातः स एव कल्पते मुक्तैनाने षट्शास्त्रवेदप्पि. He who has liberated himself from the terrible bonds of desires for sense objects, indeed very difficult to renounce, is alone fit for liberation. None else, even if he is well versed in all the six schools of philosophy. We have been told again and again that Vairagya is an essential and salient factor in the study of Vedanta. So, without total and complete Vairagya, the energy in us which is being spent in wrong pursuits will not be conserved for greater purposes of self culture and ultimately of self rediscovery. Indeed, the Vedantic masters were not impractical men, ignorant of the ordinary man's sense attachment. They certainly realized that to control the sense organs and to avoid their gushing from gushing forth into their respective sense objects is very difficult for an ordinary man. And yet, where Viveka has come, Vairagya is natural, and he who has gained a certain amount of freedom from the charms of sense objects is fit for liberation. The idea is that so long as the individual thirsts after anything, his entire energy will be consumed in its acquisition and possession, and there will be nothing left for him to supply him with the required dynamism for listening, reflecting, and meditating upon the contents of the scripture. That such a one alone is fit for liberation is a very positive statement, denying sensuous people any hope of success in spiritual life. Not even men who are erudite scholars in all the six schools of Indian philosophy are recognized by the Shastras as fit for total liberation from ignorance, and ignorance created misunderstandings in themselves. With mere book learning, without the heart's purity, mind's tranquility, intellect's application, and body's self denial, no progress in spiritual life which can take us towards complete liberation from our limitation is ever possible. Stanza number 79. आपात वैराग्यवतो मुमुक्षून् भावावधिपारं प्रति तुमुद्यान आशाग्रहो मज्जयते अंतराले निग्रह कंठे विनिर्वर्तः वेगात्. Those who have only an apparent dispassion and are trying to cross the ocean of change are caught by their throats by the shark of desire which violently dragging them along drowns them in the middle of the ocean. In the last verse, we noticed how Sankara, with an enthusiasm almost amounting to fanaticism, insisted that spiritual life can be claimed as a birthright only by those who have a true spirit of dispassion. Here, the Acharya warns us that false vairagya cannot sustain us for long. A spirit of detachment and a cravings for dispassion may be generated in us as a result of repeated tragedies. A tragic bereavement, a shocking disappointment, a painful failure, an agonizing physical pain, all these have been found either individually or collectively capable of creating a temporary sense of vairagya, termed in Sanskrit as samsana vairagya, an aversion to life and its finitude, which is usually generated when one has occasion to visit a cremation ground. This passing phase and temporary mood is not a solid capital upon which a person can build his entire future in the spiritual world. No doubt these temporary mental moods may be capitalized in training the mind and intellect to generate more and more sense of discrimination, which will ultimately increase the intensity of true vairagya. True dispassion is a wise condition of the ego created from a deep intellectual conviction, which in its turn has its root in perfect discrimination. Only in the maturity of an individual's spiritual flourishance can one hope to gather the fruits of wisdom. False vairagya has ruined more men than even atheism has ever done. Hundreds and thousands of indiscriminate people in almost all the religions of the world reach the sanctuaries of their respective monasteries. In the long run, however, they discover that they are not fit for a life of a total renunciation and perfect self control. Many of them who find sufficient moral courage return to the marketplace and the world of contentions to fight for and acquire and enjoy material wealth, but many come to live a choking life of frustrations and sorrows, with neither the capacity to live the life of renunciation nor the daring to return to the world of cutthroat competition. A few, though wearing the apparel of seekers, surely live a sensuous life. They are the leprous ulcers on the world's spiritual body that contaminate the serene atmosphere and vitiate its salubrious climate. The Acharya has briefly pointed out these dangers by comparing men of insincere vairagya to those who are shipwrecked on the ocean of change, which is infested with ravenous sharks of sensuous desires. These desires jump at the throats of the poor victims and drag them down and down them midday on their pilgrimage to the beyond. Stanza number 80. Visyakhyagraho yen suviraktisina hitah ksaya gacchati bhavambhodai param pertu harvarjitah. He who has destroyed the shark called sense objects with the sword of mature dispassion crosses the ocean of sansar unobstructed. Continuing the idea, it is said here that he alone who has destroyed the shark of desire lurking in the ocean of sansar can safely cross to the other shore. In order to kill the enemy, we have no other instrument save the sword of discriminative knowledge. With Viveka alone can we end our desires. Desires can come and sabotage our happiness only when the discriminative faculties in us have, as it were, gone to sleep. So long as the pure intellect is awake, The whims and fancies of mind cannot emerge a loot and plunder the peace of the inner kingdom. Only in the darkness of the bosom, when the illuminating intellect has disappeared behind the cloud of ignorance, can the temptations and desires of the heart walk out of their hideouts to steal the wealth of peace and tranquility which the individual enjoys? Once in the grasp of these minions of the moon, the person identifying with desires gets choked and drowned in the stormy sea of plurality. To live intelligently with discriminative analysis, ever conscious of the fallacies in each thought and not getting victimized by fanciful desires, is to live in Viveka, where Viveka is steady. The desires, however strong they be, will not dare to attack. Sankara rightly says that with the sword of discrimination, the seeker must destroy the shark of desire and make his way safely across the ocean of sansar. Verse number 81. विषम विषय मार्गे गच्छतो अन्नच बुद्धि प्रतिपद्भियातो मृत्युर्येष विद्धि हित सुजन गुरु त्यक्त्या गच्छते ससह युक्त्या प्रभवती फल सिद्धि सत्यम तव वृद्धि. Know that mortality soon overtakes a foolish man who walks the dangerous path of sense pleasures, whereas one who sticks to the path of divinity according to the instructions of the well meaning and noble gurus constantly walks the path divine, helped by his own reasoning faculty. He achieves the end. Know for certain this is true. In Vedanta, meditation is the technique for gaining the final experience of self rediscovery. But meditation can be successful only when the mind is not agitated by desires. In a sensuous life, one is never without some desire or the other. Thus, an individual cannot have success both in the life of meditation and in the world of sensuousness. If one is fatigued after a long walk, one cannot recoup if one continues walking. A diabetic cannot bring his sugar down even by taking saline injections daily if he is continuously consuming sugar. The human mind is disintegrated because of its desires, and it cannot be brought back to its state of healthy integration without its renouncing the very germs of its present disease. So, in Vedanta, great stress has been laid upon the necessity of avoiding the mind's running amok with its uncontrolled appetites. This idea is explained again in a very powerful style. Sankara crisply repeats what the rishis have been continuously saying in the pages of the scriptures, that the path of sensuousness leads straight to mortality while the path divine leads to immortality. Physiology also, in a much more limited sense of the term, declared that overindulgence impoverishes our vitality, bringing the physical structure to doom and death. In Vedanta, however, the term death connotes not only the condition of the body when life has ebbed out from it, but includes the very principle of change and finitude. Thus, sensuous activities with motives of pleasure and indulgence harden the animal impressions in our minds, and thereafter thoughts begin to flow in that direction more and more powerfully. Such a stupid man becomes increasingly daring in his criminalities until at last he becomes irredeemable and slips down the ladder of evolution to be ultimately destroyed. On the other hand, the way up the evolutionary ladder is also open to man, by climbing which he can slowly ascend to the very pinnacles of total fulfillment. This path has been beautifully described in the third line of the verse, which insists that he must follow the instructions given by reliable guides, the gurus on the path of spirituality. The gurus must be well meaning and worthy. These epithets speak volumes of suggestions. They must be well meaning in the sense that they should not be mere gramophone records repeating what the Shastras say, but must be men so well established in their own experiences and so familiar with the path that they can interpret it to different types of students belonging to different climes and of different ages. Also, the teacher must be a worthy man. Susanna. There are many gurus all over the world who are scriptural in word but cruel in actions. Like a tape recorder, they repeat what the rishis have said, but in their daily activities they follow faithfully what the Rakshasas did. Such ones are not worthy to be guides for the true seekers on the path of God seeking. The Guru must be perfect in all his conduct. There is no excuse for him to be vulgar in any aspect of his living. Even if there be a sacred Guru and the disciples surrender unto him, this in itself cannot bear any fruit unless they are ready to actively cooperate with the teacher and cultivate for themselves the perfection indicated to them by him. Each of the disciples must, all through his contact with his Guru, bring into his field of inquiry his entire powers of reasoning, bright and intelligent, independent and original. He should not, on any score, allow himself to be overwhelmed by the master. No teacher worth the name will allow the disciple to choke his independent reasoning faculty. The best of teachers have always endeavored to cultivate a better crop of reasoning in the intellect of their disciples. A student who has turned away from the tragic path of sensuousness and has stepped onto the glorious highways of the divine, who is prepared to go forward under the guidance of a true teacher with nothing but his independent discriminative reasoning to supply him with mental agility and strength, will surely reach his goal. In order to prove the validity of these declarations, the last line ends with a powerful rejoinder, an emphatic assertion, know this to be true. Stanza number 82. मोक्षस्य कांक्षा यदि वै त्वास्ति त्यज्यादि दूराद्वेष विषम यथा पीयूषवत्तोदया अक्स्मार्जौ प्रशांति दान्तिर्भज नित्य मादरात. If you have indeed a craving for liberation, avoid sense objects from a distance. Just as you would avoid things known to be poisonous and with respectful reverence daily cultivate the nectarine virtues, contentment, forgiveness, straightforwardness, calmness, and self control. So far, Sankara, through the Guru, was advising the seekers in Vedanta on what they should do in order to realize the self and thus end their misunderstandings and sorrows in life. He has so far insisted upon the importance of Viveka and Vairagya. Now he is slowly coming to a discussion to encourage the development of the noble qualities of the head and heart, which, as we have earlier discussed, is the third item of adjustment to be made by a student before a guaranteed success in self realization is assured to him. Having known a thing to be poisonous, however thirsty you may be, you will not be tempted to drink it. So too, however tempting the sense objects may look, an individual who seeks liberation should totally renounce the idea that they contain even a trace of potency to supply joy. By withdrawing the sense organs from their fields of activity, we conserve a tremendous amount of energy which would otherwise be wasted. If this newfound energy is not immediately harnessed to do special work, the chances are that we will spend this dynamism in mentally dreaming of sense indulgence. This brings about an ugly deformity in our personality to remain physically inert but mentally sensuous develops a distorted personality, drained of all brilliance and beauty through suppressed desires and unseen mental dissipations. It is to avoid such dangerous consequences at the mental plane that we should have the guidance of the teacher. Fresh fields have been discovered where the energy so conserved could be used up to raise smiling crops of beauty and profit. We are told how an individual who has learned to shun sense objects must immediately take up the constructive scheme of developing the positive qualities such as contentment, compassion, forgiveness, straightforwardness, calmness, and self control. When we analyze them, we find that each one of these qualities is in itself an attitude of the mind which will not suffer even the least disturbance in itself. As we diligently practice them, necessarily will we seek and establish our identity with our fellow beings and enjoy the intimate brotherhood of man and the divine fraternity of the soul. Fascination for body criticized. Stanza number 83. Anukshanam yat prihirte karte manade vidyakrit bandho mokshanam देहे प्रार्थो यम मुष्य पोषणे ये सज्जते se sau manen hanti. This body is essentially an instrument for realizing the Paramatma. He who does not constantly use it for liberating himself from the bondage born of beginningless ignorance but struggles to nourish it is destroying himself. Every physical sheath, be it in the human, plant, or animal life, is an instrument for its mind and intellect to echo out from the world of situations a definite quota of experiences. The body provides for the time being, as it were, a locus for the mind and intellect to function from. Identifying one's self with the body because of ignorance, one may behave as if one was the doer and the enjoyer and use the physical body to its own damnation. A drunken driver identifying himself with his drunken hallucinations may use his vehicle to drive recklessly and crash into a wayside tree. The very same physical body could be made use of properly by a discriminating intellect when it serves the ego as a vehicle to take to its supreme goal. A sensible driver with his wits about him can drive his vehicle easily with speed and comfort straight to his destination. Sankara thus reminds the students that the body is not meant merely for gross activities and indulgence in sensuous enjoyments, but having experienced the imperfections of the world, it is also meant for striving hard for self redemption. Having gained this wondrous instrument, if a person does not make use of it properly, he is in effect committing suicide. The meaning of the verse pivots around the crucial word prapartha. This word can be milked to yield two different and distinct meanings, of which the nobler and more spiritual has already been discussed. From the same word, we can coax out another meaning. An object that is meant for others to enjoy is also prartha. In this sense, we get in the single term a beautiful summary of the biography of the body. In the womb, the body grew nourished by the mother's assimilated food. The body born in the world was fed by the milk of the mother and it grew to childhood. Till its death, it is being fed from within and without with various nutritive diets and oil messages. But after death, the very same body, so laboriously tended, so carefully nourished, so lovingly fattened, becomes a substantial meal for the worms of the earth if it is lucky to be breathed deep enough. Else it becomes food for the wolves and dogs, the vultures and crows. This is a timely reminder for discriminative spiritual students to realize the futility of paying court to their bodies and living a life dedicated to the health and comforts of this disgusting bundle of matter. Stanza number 84. शरीर पोषणार्थी संयय आत्मानं दिद्रक्ष्यति ग्राहं दारोध्या धृत्वा नदीं तरतुम सयगच्छति. Whoever seeks to rediscover the self by devoting himself to the care of the body is like one who proceeds to cross a river holding on to a shark which one has mistaken for a log of wood. Sankara here strikingly brings out how dangerous and suicidal is the attempt of the individual to perfect himself through physical indulgences and enjoyments. Anxiety for the body is an expression of our identification with it. This can come only when, in our delusion, we have totally forgotten our essentially divine nature. ignorance and self-knowledge cannot exist at the same place and at the same time. Where the ghost is recognized, there the post is non-existent, and one who recognizes the post, to him the ghost is not available at all. Similarly, one's beloved in a dream is non-existent in the waking state. So he who is attached to his body and is wasting his time and energy nourishing and flattening it is indeed a fool. He is as far removed from the goal as the recognition of the rope is from one who is dying in delusion of being bitten by a serpent. Stanza number 85. मोह एव महामृत्यु मुमुक्षो पुरादिषु मोहो विनिर्जितो येन स मुक्ति पदमर्हति. For a student seeking liberation, infatuation with the body, etc., is a tragic death. He who has totally conquered this attachment deserved the state of liberation. To him who is aspiring to rise above the fascination of the sense organs for the sense objects and the calamitous confusions of emotions and thoughts, it is indeed a dire tragedy if he were to allow himself to be tempted by the fields of immediate pleasures which the body experiences in the midst of objects, to turn our attention away from the sense world and to seek diligently the experience of the transcendental is the path by which the higher can be unfolded. Prompted by this Prompted by his vasanas, the individual might meet situations and moments when he is irresistibly jerked out of his contemplative moods to fulfill the demands of the world around him. This will destroy the equipoise of the seeker, and so Sankara characterizes it as a dire death, Mahamritu. On the other hand, he who has won a victory over his own delusory misconceptions, moha, and is not tempted by the outer world, discovers in himself a steadiness of contemplation with which he can certainly learn to withdraw himself from the whirlpools of matter and come to experience the pure self. This is the condition of utter liberation from the entanglements and fascinations of one's matter vesture. So I conclude this video at this stage. Next video number 7 will start with stanza number 86 of Viveka Chudamani of Adi Sankaracharya. Thank you. Namaste.